The words hero and superhero get tossed around so easily these days. I mean, it's okay if it's just for fun. I mean, after all, this guy is...
faster than a speeding bullet.
Whoa, that's fast. And how about powerful?
More powerful than a locomotive.
That is crazy. But can that guy jump?
Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's, oh my God, it's not up there. It's our frontline workers and our first responders. Remember last summer when we thought these guys were superheroes?
It's amazing. Everybody's out. I don't believe nobody went into work today. Look at it, it's crazy.
Well, last night we saw the real heroes on that same street, and today on Isolation Nation, we meet them face to face. Okay, somehow Phil found a way to mute me. I said no one could ever mute me, but he found a way to shut me up. That was actually recorded on Monday, and we had a few technical difficulties, so we didn't play it. So that was me making reference to that super evening with superheroes on Sunday night. Hey, folks, welcome to Isolation Nation. Three heroes standing by right now. Before we get to them, I wanted to show you something that I do every month. I start the month with no marks on my arm, and when I struggle in a day, and I'm talking about with depression or anxiety or the combination of the two, I put a mark on my arm. So here we are on the 24th day of this month, and I can put only 2 marks on my arm. 2 marks. And you know what that is? That says, hey, I'm still one of you if you're struggling. But most importantly, that says hope. Hope for someone who right now on the 24th day of this month has 24 potential marks on their arm. That is what it is all about when you come to talking about mental health. People need hope. In 2 days out of 24, when I've had many months in my life, 24 to 24, that's a really good thing. All right, let's find out what Natalia Kusendova is doing right now. She is not only MPP for Mississauga Centre, but she is a registered nurse who has gone back to her job doing 12-hour shifts because she wants to make a difference on the front lines. Natalia, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
So you're obviously now in the hospital. That's why you're wearing a mask, and you've been working these 12-hour shifts. First of all, thank you for doing that. And I think it's so important to thank the people that are stepping up and taking risks for us, because I take no risks in doing this, right? I'm sitting here at my kitchen table, about as safe as you can be. Why did you choose to sign up to do something that carries so much risk?
Well, thank you, Michael. I just want to say we have some of the best nurses and doctors in the entire world right here in Ontario. And so it was a really no-brainer for me when I decided to come back and to rejoin my colleagues here at Etobicoke General Hospital. There was a call for retired nurses and even nursing students to come and help because we were preparing for a big surge in COVID-19 patients. And that's what I did. And I'm happy to do just a small part and to be just a small part of the fight against COVID.
So your job, you've been an RN before you became an MPP for how long?
So about 4 to 5 years, I would say. I was full-time for years, and then I got elected, and I still continued working, but on a very casual basis to maintain my license.
So, in working for 4 or 5 years at Etobicoke General as an RN, I'm wondering, before COVID-19, I imagine it wasn't nearly as frightening to go do your job. And now I'm inserting myself into your head and I'm saying, okay, well, as an RN, of course you could pick something up, but for the most part, you're pretty safe. But now you've gone into a war zone. How has that affected you?
Well, you know what? Of course, there are risks associated with our job as a nurse or as a physician. But, that's why we have training during nursing school and in medical school. We are trained for these type of scenarios. And, a pandemic doesn't come very often. But, that's why we have simulations, which I participated in a couple of weeks ago. We had a Code Blue, protected Code Blue simulation, meaning we were pretending we had a patient with COVID and we were doing a CPR and intubation scenario on them. And so we did it way before we actually had to do it live in a real life situation. And so I think it's really important that we practice and we have those protocols and procedures in place. But you know what, when I come to do my job, I feel safe, I feel protected, I follow all the protocols. Yes, there is a risk associated with it, but I signed up to be a nurse. I was aware that my job comes with certain risks.
Natalia Kusendova, as I said, I think it's pretty awesome, and especially the way you minimize it. You're not willing to say, yes, I'm going into a war zone, but most of us feel that way because most of us insert ourselves into your life and say, well, how would I feel about this? Because if I was walking down the street and I knew someone coming towards me potentially could have COVID-19, I would do my best to stay away from that person. But you can't do that. You don't do that. You walk into an area that is extremely risky. So you're not frightened more than you were before. You're not intimidated by the idea that the virus is out there.
Well, of course, I think about it, and of course, sometimes I get a little bit scared. But my job is to help people and to help the most vulnerable. And whether it's in my job as a nurse or even as a politician, I signed up to care for people and to try to improve their lives. And so that's just the way I see it. And every time I walk into a patient's room, I'm there to help them. And so, that I guess call to public duty is what really drives me. But also, I see the effect that I have on my patients, when I'm able to help them and they feel better. There's no better reward in the world than that feeling of being able to brighten someone's day and help them feel better. And so that's what drives me and my colleagues each and every day.
Natalia, you're talking about how you enjoy brightening people's days, and just from the tone of your voice, there's a brightening that happens. But I'm wondering, that's got to be way more important now because most patients are in isolation by nature, right? I mean, they don't have visitors, and potentially at the most difficult time in their lives, they're on their own.
Well, that is true. And I mean, some of the patients that I'm seeing, I'm their only physical human contact in the last 40 days or so. And so, spending that extra minute or two to have that conversation and ask, are there any more stressors in their life, how their day is going, how are they coping with not seeing their grandchildren for the last 40 days? I think it makes a true difference to be able to have that conversation and spend that extra time, because human contact is important. And it doesn't make a big difference. And so I always try to keep in mind that I may be the only person this individual is interacting with for the next little while. So I do try to always keep that in mind and make sure I'm very thoughtful in my conversations.
I would imagine that this has brought you closer to patients for sure, but also, to your colleagues. I mean, there's nothing that unites people more than having a common enemy. And, in your hospital, like every hospital in, just about in the world, you're fighting a common enemy and you're all risking exactly the same amount.
Well, there's definitely a sense of camaraderie and closeness that has developed among our colleagues. And, just before my break, we had a new patient, and it was a positive for COVID patient who was coming in. C-test 2, we call it. So it's someone that may need to get intubated. So pretty serious case. And, I saw all my colleagues putting on their PPE, putting on their armor as they were preparing for battle. But there's a very calm and collected way of doing that. And I think we have mastered it here at Etobicoke General Hospital. And that's why it's so important that we started early practicing these scenarios, that we now all feel very comfortable when those scenarios are happening in real life. We have protocols and we have each other. I think the biggest thing is that we have each other. But what I wanted to say as well is we've had such an outpouring of support from the community. Almost every day we have coffee dropped off to us or some kind of treat dropped off to us by a community organization. A lot of people volunteering or donating even personal protective equipment. Businesses are stepping up. And so we do feel the support, and we see Canadians, coming out at 7:30 to cheer for healthcare workers as we change shifts. So we feel the love from all Canadians and all Ontarians. And so we know that we're not alone in this fight. And I think that's what really gives us hope, and that's what keeps us going.
So you mentioned a patient that came in who's positive for COVID-19. So that patient would come into your hospital and would be by themselves, right? There's no family. There's no one with them. what is your immediate reaction if you're one of the caregivers in that situation? What do you say to people like that? Like I said before, I mean, that this is, you know, perhaps the most frightening time in someone's life, and they look around and all they see are strangers.
Yeah, so definitely it's a frightening time. A lot of these patients are now coming from long-term care. Patients that are coming in from home, they usually have moderate symptoms or not severe symptoms. And so they are taken care of in a different area of the emergency room. But the ones that do have to get intubated or have CPR, some of them may not even be conscious or maybe, you know, deteriorating very fast. And so again, it's very important that we try to communicate with our patients as much as possible. But at that time, you know, we're trying to save a life. We have to put on our PPE, and the biggest or the most challenging communication is actually with our colleagues, with each other, because underneath all of that protective equipment, sometimes it's really hard to hear each other. And so, you know, those reassurances are very important at that time. And again, I always come back to practicing those drills, but I think we have perfected it to a certain degree.
You know, you're on the show today, and of course, you know, we're not going to hold you up, just so people know. You know, you're on your break right now, so you planned this to squeeze this in, and I think, you know, what you're sharing in the environment you're sharing it in is pretty profoundly touching for I think everybody probably who's watching. But you're on with two firefighters, and in firefighting, one of the issues has been over the last 50 years that people experience these awful things. They see awful things. They take awful risks, you know, and they have not typically in the past really shared with each other. And that is one of the ways to diffuse mental illness before it happens. PTSD before it happens is to open up and share and talk to your colleagues. Oh my gosh, this is really hard for me. And most of us don't want to do that because we want to be strong. Are you sharing? Are you releasing some of what must be poison inside you from the things that you've seen?
So definitely there is a certain degree of PTSD that can accumulate over time. And as nurses or paramedics or firefighters, we are exposed to a lot of very tragic situations. Most of the time when people see us, there is some kind of tragedy going on in their life. And over time, it can accumulate. But we do have supports available to us as healthcare providers. And if there is a tragic, critical incident, you know, we do have debriefing sessions with our peers and with counselors and crisis intervention workers. And it truly does make a difference when we do take the time later on, slow down and talk about what happened and what we could have done differently. And, you know, just acknowledge the grief and the tragedy. And it truly does help. But, you know, with the government of Ontario, we are aware that, you know, mental health is becoming a more pronounced issue now that more people are in isolation, and those vulnerabilities are becoming more pronounced. And so that's why, you know, we've invested about $12 million to provide, you know, services for providers so they're able to change their services onto online and to have virtual platforms available, because now everything is happening online. So some of those mental health providers, they need to transition their practice online. And that's why we've recognized that it's very important to do so.
Natalia, I'm not talking to you now. I'm talking to the people of Mississauga Centre. Good job in electing Natalia Kusendova. Good job. And they probably had no idea how good a job it was. You know, you're making a lot of people proud, and I think you're making the whole area of politics proud, because the complaint that many of us have is, you know, politicians, they're sheltered from real life, and they don't necessarily, and I'm not talking about anyone in particular, but just in general, you know, when you're in Queen's Park, you know, you're far away from where you are right now. So I think it's amazing that you did that you're doing that, and thank you, and stay healthy.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say a big thank you to the people of Ontario for really staying at home, because it does make a difference to us. And, you know, one of our early projections in terms of deaths in Ontario were between 3,000 and 15,000. And, you know, we have not seen those numbers, knock on wood, and thanks God, we have not seen these tragic numbers yet. And hopefully we will not. So we do see that the social isolation protocols and really people taking to heart that it's truly working. And so, you know, now is not the time to change those behaviors. Just stay strong and continue, because you're helping us, nurses and doctors, to really take care of the most sick and most vulnerable patients as they come. and we have not been overwhelmed. You know, the images that you're seeing out of Italy or out of even New York, which is much closer to home, they're not happening here in Ontario, knock on wood. And so please, thank you and keep on going. We need you to stay at home so we can take care of the ones who really need our help. Thank you very much.
And you're doing that. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to Kendra Fisher. I want you to say hi to her in 5 languages. Go ahead.
No pressure. Bonjour, dzień dobry, dobry dzień, dobry den, and hello.
Oh my gosh. So that's English, French, Czech, Slovak, and Polish.
That's right.
All right. Thank you so much for this. And like I said, thank you for appearing on this show. But more than that, just thank you.
It's my pleasure. And also thank you to the firefighters, policemen, and all frontline staff that are out there each and every day servicing the people of Ontario. We're a team. We're in it together. It's true Ontario spirit. Thank you.
Nice. Okay. Well, you go back and do what you have chosen to do, which is to make a difference, as you have, Kendra Fisher. I think I met you at a CMHA event, probably. I think it was in Scarborough. It was probably 6-7 years ago. Great to see you. You have become one of the strongest voices, advocates for mental health sharing, former goalkeeper in both inline and on the ice, and your career as a goaltender was interrupted, right, because of anxiety that you were suffering, and it forced you to give up the thing that you love to do, right?
Yeah, that is unfortunately what happened. Yeah, that was my goal, my dream. I planned on the Olympics. I certainly never planned on this, and unfortunately, mental illness had a different journey planned out for me.
So when did you first start to speak about it publicly? And did you think at the time, okay, I'm getting out there and I'm going to share this experience? Or do you find yourself actually almost surprised at the beginning with yourself that here you are comfortable talking about it?
Yeah, no, it certainly was never like a, I'm going to go do this kind of moment. It was very much, I spent the first 5 years after diagnosis, I couldn't leave my apartment. I couldn't be alone. I couldn't function. And the next 5 years, I really spent learning how to cope with it, how to deal with my diagnosis and what I was living with. And it was around that 10-year mark, actually, after my diagnosis, when unfortunately and tragically, Darren Richardson took her own life. And I happened to be at the Ontario Women's Hockey Association's head office when it happened. When the director came back from her service, and they put her memorial down in front of me. And I just remember looking at it thinking, I'm part of the problem. At that point, I had figured out how to manage this in a way that I was living a great life, and I was ashamed of it. I was embarrassed. I didn't want anybody to know that about me. And it really took understanding the detriment of my silence and the impact of my silence, and not helping others to understand that there's hope, and that we really can find a way to manage this and live a great life with this. And that's kind of what gently pushed me into starting to share my story. And then it was just understanding the magnitude of crisis that we're in, is why I haven't stopped since.
You mentioned Darren Richardson, her dad. I'm not telling you this, obviously. I'm telling folks.
Mm-hmm.
Her dad was Luke Richardson, who played almost 20 years in the NHL. One of his teams was the Toronto Maple Leafs. Then he was an assistant coach with the Ottawa Senators. He was in Ottawa with his family. He and his wonderful wife, Stephanie, had 2 daughters. Darren was 14, I think, at the time, and she took her own life. And one of the things that stayed with me the first time that I spoke to Luke was him saying these words. He said, "We talk to our kids about everything. We talk to them about, about sex and drinking and driving and drugs and, all of the issues that parents talk to their kids about. but we never talked about mental illness, and we never talked about suicide. And I have not forgot that from that moment. And it makes me just want to cry thinking about that, because I'm seeing his face and I'm hearing his voice. And I realize that even in 2020, we still face this vacuum where people don't talk. And that's, I think, to me, one of the reasons why what you do is so important.
Well, it's one of those things that we still feel the need to shy away from. And I mean, we have these campaigns that are geared towards stigma and geared towards awareness. And I think it's more acceptable to acknowledge its existence, but we still tend to kind of shy away from the reality of it and how many people it's affecting, and really how much of an impact it's having on people.
So how are you doing? You're a firefighter, and which is your occupation. It makes you at far greater risk for PTSD and other mental health challenges like addiction. You have a pre-existing condition, as we talked about, that forced you to give up hockey. How are you coping with all of that, on top of the fact that, you know, we have a pandemic going on?
Yeah. It's ironic. I mean, I remember my interview to become a firefighter, and I remember them asking me, you know, how are you going to deal with, you know, seeing these horrible things? How are you going to manage this? How are you going to handle it? And my answer in that moment, in that interview, was, I'm going to handle it the same way I've been training to manage my mental health for the past, you know, 20 years. It's been this kind of constant seeking out the supports I need and making sure that I have them in place. And I know to do that. I know how to do it, because that's been a focus of mine for so long. And so it's helpful, I find, especially when kind of the larger issues come up, such as this pandemic. It's almost, I feel comfortable in knowing that I know how to manage the added stress of it, and the, I guess, kind of the overwhelming nature of it. And certainly, I mean, I've had my moments, and I've had my days of just being kind of blown away by the magnitude. But for the most part, I tend to take everything kind of a day at a time, and that really helps me to manage everything.
Well, you just came off a long shift, right? We were talking before we went on the air, and you've now been working through this pandemic. You know, do you find yourself more uptight? Uptight's not a good word. More fearful going into your job? Because I'm sure that in your job as a firefighter, you are trained to deal with all kinds of emergencies. But this is different. And maybe you had pandemic training, maybe you didn't. But now you have this unseen enemy that can kill you, and you don't know who has it.
I mean, I think that it would be foolish to say that I'm not aware of it all the time and that I'm not stressed. I mean, I think I'm working on my, like, Tom Cruise jawline from clinching so much. You know, I think it's really just kind of paying attention to the changes as they're happening. I mean, we're learning a lot every day, and we're changing our protocols every day, and we're making sure that we are kind of responding in the best possible way, however we're learning to do that. And so you're conscious of it, you're aware of it. And I mean, it's also unique as a firefighter, because you're going into a station with, you know, your colleagues, and you're essentially living with them for those 24 hours. So it's not only just, you know, the question of, is this call COVID positive? And if so, how are we managing it? How are we approaching it? It's also really, you know, being respectful of your coworkers and figuring out how to coexist in a way that is trying to maintain social isolation in a very closed quarter. So there's so many facets of it that are just kind of day to day, and learning how to take it as we go.
Well said. Hey, Chris Tessaro, I'm sure you can understand exactly what she's saying. Chris Tessaro is acting captain, Toronto firefighter, my buddy for years and years and years, and well, maybe not that many years. And good to see you, my friend. How you doing?
I'm getting along. I'm at work today and doing the job, and it's a different world, that's for sure.
So you can speak to Kendra if you want and relate how you view the question I asked to her, how it applies to you.
You know, it's a great question. And the one thing that's different, and I'll tell you this, is that when you take a job like this, there's an expectation of risk. You expect to go to work and at times risk your life. Doesn't happen often, but it does come up. What I didn't expect, and where the stress comes from this, was to risk my family's life. So that's the difference. Is you go to work, what are you bringing home? And you know, my neighbors, I hope my garage door doesn't go up by accident one day when I come home from work, because they'll see me naked in my garage as I strip off my clothes from work to make sure I don't contaminate my family. And those are stresses that you're not equipped for.
Yeah, that's and I kind of summarized it. I mean, my instinct immediately was to make some kind of joke about you being naked in your garage. But I mean, what could be more profound than what you just said, which is that you sign up to risk your life. You understand that, but you don't sign up at the time to risk your family's life. It's not like you're taking your kids. How many kids do you have?
I have 2.
Okay. It's not like you're taking your kids out on a call with you when you go to fight a fire. That would be risking, you know, your kids' lives. Kendra, you must relate to this. How many kids do you have?
I have 2, and it's exactly that. It's horrible. I mean, I'm in a position where I have a 3-year-old who doesn't really understand why when I get home I can't hug him, and it's only just getting to a point after however many shifts into this pandemic we are that he's getting it enough that he's not always running away in tears, because I'm asking him to stay away long enough for me to get undressed and get my clothes into the wash and get into the shower, and you know, he doesn't get it, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. He asked me yesterday if he put on a bag, if he'd be allowed to come see me at the station again.
Yeah, that kind of sums it up. Have you become, the two of you, Chris, have you become a paranoid parent when it comes to COVID? I mean, all parents are paranoid. We all worry about our kids, and, you know, especially when our kids are young. You know, I know I was a panicker, but this is something totally different. Have you become like really paranoid watching your kids, and, you know, like is he or she sneezing or sniffing or coughing?
Yeah, I mean, temperature checks are a regular daily occurrence in our house because, as I say, you don't know what you encounter at work. You don't know what you're bringing home. And if something's going to happen, you want to catch it as quickly as possible so that there's no chance of passing it on to your kids and your family. But I try not to be too paranoid, because it's enough stress at work on its own without trying to, you know, infect that into the rest of your family. So that's a bit of a struggle at times.
Yeah. How about you, Kendra? Are you do you find yourself monitoring your kids so incredibly closely that you realize this isn't good for anybody?
Yeah, well, it's I'm monitoring myself the most. I'm trying my best to not change their day to day as much as I can, which is ironic right now. I know our one son's only just about to turn a year actually this weekend, so he doesn't quite get it yet. But our 3-year-old, I don't really want him to have that level of panic about it. As somebody who lives with mental illness, I'm very aware of what that impact can be on him. So it's like Chris said, it's, you know, really self-monitoring, trying to catch it. I did have one day where I wasn't feeling great, and right away locked myself in my room, and my wife kept my kids away from me and just kind of played it out and saw where the 24 hours took me. And gratefully it didn't turn out to be anything serious. So, but yeah, I mean, it's the greatest fear in all of this is knowing that I'm the X factor. My family is isolated, my boys are isolated, my wife is isolated, and if they get sick, it's going to be from me.
And one of the things that comes into all that too is the stress factors. You talk about stress and PTSI and PTSD. A lot of PTSI, as you well know, Michael, and the great work you've done with our chief, with Chief Peg, PTSI and PTSD is a lot of things that you can't control. You go to a call and you can't control what happened. You can't control the outcome. And this whole epidemic, this whole pandemic is something that we can't control. There's no training that we can do other than to try and keep ourselves safe to combat this. So it's a whole stress all on its own to try and deal with this day in and day out.
Yeah, and every job has its particular challenges, and every station in life has its own particular challenges. Like if you have kids, then that complicates everything a lot. And when you do the job that you guys do, that complicates it even more. What did you think of? I'm thinking of how to phrase this. What did you think of Natalia? Do you view her, Chris, as a hero? And that's a word that I used to start the show.
Absolutely. There's absolutely no question. Doctors, nurses, ER, emergency rooms, the Toronto, or not just Toronto, but all paramedics everywhere. The job they're doing is just absolutely outstanding. They've been superstars, in every level. We're a small part of that chain. We do what we do. But these guys have stepped up to the plate and stepped up their game just so much. It's incredible to watch. They deserve every bit of the accolades they're getting.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of set you up with that because now I'm going to call you a hero and say, well, you can't deny it because you just referred to all kinds of other people. I'm going to say the same thing to you, Kendra. I'm sure if someone says, "Oh, thank you so much for doing what you do, you're a hero," how do you respond to that?
Well, for me
personally,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris. For me, it's I guess I don't view it that way. To me, I guess I've always kind of run on the same thought. And that thought was always, if my family was pulled over on the side of the road, if my family was sick, if my family was, if they needed help, I can't expect anybody to stop and help them. I can't expect anybody to go out of their way to help them if I'm not willing to do the same for them. And to me, it's just about community. It's about doing your part, and it's about really kind of just paying attention and seeing where we can help out. I mean, I would say, across the street from me, I have an ICU nurse from one of the hospitals downtown Toronto. And every day I'm just checking in on her to see if I can do anything to make her day better and make sure she has everything she needs to keep going. And yeah, I think, for me, it's not about internalizing it. It's just about, being blessed with the opportunity to be in a position where you can affect some change and hopefully do your part to help others feel a bit safer and find their way through to tomorrow in a really complex, messy, kind of unprecedented time.
Yeah, well put. Chris, go ahead.
It's the same. I echo that sentiment. It's a blessing to be able to do a job where you get to help people on occasion. There's hero is not a word that sits very well with me because it's just what we do. And listen, there's lots of heroes out there, not just doctors and nurses and paramedics, but people that are, working with their families and trying to teach their kids from home and changing their lives completely to stay at home to try and help everybody else out. Those are heroes too.
Well, nobody who actually has ever been a true hero in life has ever admitted that they were a true hero in life. It's one of the things that goes with it. One of the things that goes with doing something selfless is a sense of humility, which prevents you from saying, yeah, you know what? Oh my God, I am a hero. So I expected nothing else from you guys, but I trapped you both by saying, what about Natalia? And oh my God, she's a hero. Well, so are you guys. Hold on one sec. By the way, Chris, you're in uniform.
I am in uniform. I'm at work today, Station 142, right. And courtesy of our chief, Chief Peg, who you have a great relationship with, granted me permission to do this today. And it's just a sign of faith of the great relationship that Toronto Fire has with you.
Okay, well, that's very cool. Hold on, guys. I just want to make you aware of the fact that if you continue to watch this show, possibly you could find the recipe for perhaps the greatest cookies ever. Roll it, Phil. Take a look.
Hey, if you got to be isolated, you may as well do something productive that is fun and so tasty. If that's Chef Gordon Ramsay, tell him I said, F*** off! Yeah, F*** off! God, I love doing that. Here is the recipe for what we're now calling Jewish cookies. Not Jew cookies, because my wife didn't like that saying. So here's what goes in them, except for this, because I'm putting this away. That's the mystery. You got sugar, you got flour in there, you got baking powder in there, you've got salt in there, vanilla, eggs, chocolate chips, and ground almonds. Put them all together with the oil that you got here, and what you get is this. So good. You got to be watching the show because you never know when I'm going to give out the recipe. Now get the f*** out of here. Paran here. It was the Jewish Gordon Ramsay. You like that, Case?
Yeah, but I didn't try it.
Oh. Really good.
Oh, Karen's over there. I was going to go with the old name, but she's listening. Damn. So yeah, I mean, those cookies are great. And one thing I promised guests like you guys who are heroes, we'll get you some of those Jewish cookies, and you can agree or disagree that they're pretty freaking awesome. And this was really memorable for me. And I just think that open, honest sharing is one of the coolest things that you can do, whether it's television or radio or social media. Hearing from people who expose more of themselves than they normally would, I think is an amazing thing. And man, we had 3 right people for that today. Thanks, Chris. Good to see you, my friend.
Happy to be here and great to see you too.
Okay, and hopefully we won't do this again because this pandemic will end. But if it continues the way it is, let's get caught up again in the future. And Kendra Fisher, oh my gosh, I'm just really sort of taken by how you shared what got you to share the fact that you're combining all of these things in your life and still fighting on. I think that's amazing. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Michael.
Kendra Fisher, firefighter. Chris Tessaro, firefighter. Natalia Kusendova. God, I had it all rehearsed, all practiced, and there it went. We leave you with a thought, as we do every day. And one of the things that I hear from people who struggle with depression in particular is that they don't matter. I hear that all the time. I don't matter. When you say, like you got to do something about this, you got to fight back, you got to fight your illness because it's not going away on its own. You need to search out help. You need to make this a priority. And people say, I don't matter. Well, if you don't matter, then I don't matter. And I do matter. Remember that. You matter. Okay, we leave you with verse number 1 of what is going to be our theme song. Verses number 2 and 3 are coming on Monday. Roll it, Phil. We'll see you Monday at Isolation Nation.
Here's the thing. I think you should have more music on the show. So I've just written a little song. See if it works. It's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. It's a nation in isolation. This would be a good time to take up masturbation. Yeah, Isolation Nation. Huh? What do you think? 2 on the nose?